Welcome back to a video lesson. This lesson is actually a bonus lesson. This doesn't correlate to a specific lesson like 5.3 or 5.4, but it deals with positive and negative integers, and I want to teach you and remind you how to add and subtract positive and negative integers. So please fill that title out in your table of contents. We are going to be on page 58 today with those two green sheets, and I'll explain how to work those in your notebook right after you fill this out in your table of contents. So you have two green sheets. One has notes at the top and one has adding and subtracting integers at the top. You have to just trim down both of them. They do line up right in line with each other. So if you just take the sheet and just trim them down so that you can see both columns, that will be fantastic. It'll fit in your notebook that way. What you're going to do is you're going to take the note page and you're going to turn your notebook so it's this way, and you're going to glue it just like this. So that is the notes. And then you're going to take your other one and you're just going to glue this top piece to the top of the green, so that when you are done, you have your practice problems on top. And then you're going to have to snip just up the center so that you can open up the addition practice and see the notes how to do that, and the same for the subtraction side. Okay, so you are going to have to turn your book, and you are going to have to just put a little bit of glue up at the top and then snip up the center when you are done. So it should look like this once you are finished. Go ahead and do that whole cut, glue, paste, fold thing, and then we'll be ready to learn tips and tricks on how to add and subtract integers. So I'm going to show you the addition notes first, and there's a couple of things for you to do and then some tricks on the bottom. And we're going to do an activity in class tomorrow to practice this. You can use pictures and manipulatives to add and subtract positive and negative numbers. So we're just going to start with adding. And our pictures are literally us drawing a positive symbol and a negative symbol. And so just so you know, one positive sign represents one positive number. So if I had two positive signs, that means I have positive 2. Similarly, if I have a negative symbol, that stands for -1. And if I have 2 negatives, that means I have -2. So we're going to represent these numbers with positive and negative symbols and then combine them. So if I have 5 plus 3, obviously we know that that's 8. But to show that with positive symbols, we would literally just draw 5 positives, that stands for 5, and 3 more would stand for the 3, and then we would add them all up, and we have 8 positives. So let's do the same thing, but now they're both negatives. We're going to draw 4 negative symbols, that stands for -4. Then we're going to add 3 more negatives. And then we have to figure out how many total negatives we have. And we have 7, so our answer is -7. So let's now move on to 2 different types when you have different signs. So this was just 2 positive numbers being added. This was 2 negative numbers being added. Now we're going to have a combination of a positive and a negative. It's a little bit different when you do that. Before we do, I want to share with you what pairs of 0 mean. Right up there, I had a positive and a negative, and a positive and a negative. I can pair one positive with one negative symbol, and they cancel each other out. Think about it this way. If you owed your friend $1, that would be a -1. But then if you paid them back with a positive 1, you don't have any debt. So that would be a 0. So one positive and one negative cancel each other out. So positive 1 and a -1 equals 0. A positive 2 and a -2 equals 0. So anytime you have one positive and one negative, that you can cross out, it becomes a 0. Notice when I actually circle the two of them, I'm making a 0. So that's kind of cool too. So making pairs of 0 by combining one positive and one negative is something we're going to have to do for these last two examples. So when we have a -3, we're going to show that with pictures by showing 3 negatives. I'm going to do this above. Okay, so that's the picture, 3 negatives. Then we're going to add 5 positives. So I'm going to draw them right underneath the negatives in a nice neat row. Now I can combine one positive with one negative, and they cancel each other out, and they disappear. So that's 0, that's another 0, and that's another 0. What am I left with? I'm left with 2 positives. So the answer is going to be +2. Let's try another one. We're going to start now with a +3. I'm going to do this one down here. So I have 3 positives. Then I'm going to add to that 4 negatives. I see that I can pair off one positive and one negative 3 times. So all of those go away, and I'm left with 1 negative. So my answer is -1. So like I said, we're going to practice with manipulatives tomorrow, this. I'm now going to go down and just review the tricks that you can do without using these pictures. So this is right below that, still on the inside of my note sheet. I have not done the examples yet. And these are just some rules that you can use if you don't want to use the pictures. So when you're adding the same signs, either if both are positive or they are both negative, you just keep the sign that it is. If they're 2 positives, your answer is going to be positive. And if it's 2 negatives, your answer is going to be negative. So the sign stays the same, and you just add the numbers up. So 10 and 6, 16, you have a positive and a positive, so your answer is positive. Over here we have 9 and 5, that's 14, but notice the negative, negative, negative carries across. It's when there's different signs, a positive and a negative, or a negative and a positive, where things get a little bit different. So here's what I want you to circle. Keep the sign, meaning the answer of the addition problem is either going to be positive or negative according to the greatest absolute value number. So you have to look at both numbers being added and which one has the greatest absolute value. The sign of that number will be the sign of the answer. I'll show you what I mean. The last thing we're going to do is then take the numbers and find the difference between them. So let's do some examples with this way of working. My first example, we have a 100, which is negative, being combined with 1,000, which is positive. I want to take the absolute value of both numbers, and so I have 100 and then 1,000. Which one's bigger? The 1,000. What sign, positive or negative, is the 1,000? It's a positive. So that tells me my answer is going to be positive. And then I take these digits and I subtract them. I can do this in my head. I have 900 when I take 1,000 and subtract out 100. Okay? Let's try another one. We're going to take -70 and find the absolute value of it, and the same for +35. So I have a 70 over here and a 35 over here. Which one's bigger? The 70 is bigger. The sign associated with the 70 is negative, which tells me my answer is also going to be negative. And then I take those numbers, 70 and 35, and subtract them. So 70, 35, it actually ends up being the same. 35 plus 35 is 70. Now let's do an easier one. These two numbers, or example 3, are both negative. So our rules state that we can just keep the signs the same So it will be a negative answer, and then just add these numbers up. So we will end up with 95. That is a negative answer. Let's go back to the harder ones where one is a positive and one is a negative to finish up. So, for example, 4. Go ahead and try these first, now that I've done a couple with you, and see if you can do them on your own, and then push play when you're ready to see if you're right. The absolute value of negative 350 is 350, and the absolute value of 200 is going to be 200. So which absolute value is bigger? 350. What's the sign associated with 350? It's negative, which tells us my answer is going to be negative. Now I just subtract the numbers. 350 minus 200 is going to be 150. The last one, we take the absolute value of negative 360. That's just 360. The absolute value of 180 is 180. Which absolute value is bigger? The negative 360. So here's my equal sign. My answer is going to be negative. And then I subtract 360 and 180, which ends up being 180. So to just capture the idea of why we talk about pictures and the rules, the pictures will work every time, but because these numbers were bigger, it was easier for us to use the rules. Tomorrow in class, I'll make the problems a little bit smaller so that we can use some manipulatives and work with picture forms. This is a great graphic to just summarize as well what happens to the positive and negativeness of an answer when you're adding. 2 positives, your answer will be positive. 2 negatives, your answer will be negative. If the greater absolute value is positive, your answer will be positive. If the greater absolute value is negative, your answer will be negative. So it's a great visual to summarize what we've been talking about. Now with subtraction, we are going to do that same thing again where we're going to show the numbers with symbols, either with a positive or a negative number. So with subtraction, it's a little bit trickier to keep track of what is positive and what is negative. If you don't see any symbol, meaning it's just a 4, it's a positive 4. This is a minus sign, not a negative sign. If there was a negative sign, you would see parentheses like this example. So this is just plain old positive 4 minus positive 2. So we are going to have 4 positive symbols. And now since this is subtraction, we are taking away from what is here. We're not adding something else. So literally, I'm just going to switch colors here. We're going to cross out 2 of them, and what's left is our answer. So we have, obviously, 4 minus 2 is 2, but that's how you show it with our pictures. Now let's deal with this next one. We have 5 negatives to start with. We are going to take away 3 negatives. So do we have negatives here to take away? We do. We have 3 of them. So I'm going to cross out 1, 2, 3, and what I'm left with is my answer. My answer will be negative 2. It's a little trickier when there's 1 of each. Okay, so we had 2 negatives being subtracted, we had 2 positives being subtracted. Now we're going to switch it up a little bit. So I'm going to start here with 4 negatives. The problem with this one is that I now have to subtract 2 positives. Do I have any positives here? No, I only have 4 negatives. So I have to add 0. Remember, the concept of 1 positive and 1 negative cancel out and become 0. So I can show a 0 by adding a pair of positive and negatives. Now, do I still have -4? Yes, I do, because this just goes away, it's 0. I've not changed the value, but now I have a positive here that I can take away. But I don't have 2 of them. I have to add another set, another pair of positive and negatives. And now I have 2 positives right here that I can take away. And what I'm left with is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 negatives. So my answer ends up being -6. So a little bit different. We can't take something away if we don't have it there. So we're going to add zeros by adding a pair of positive and negatives. And then once we can take away what we need to, we'll be all set. Let's try another one. So we're starting with 5 positives. But we have to take away 3 negatives. We don't have any negatives here, so we have to add pairs of 0. When you add a pair of 0, you're just adding a positive and negative pair. You still have 5, because that just goes away. Adding a positive pair until you have 3 negatives. Now I have 3 negatives. So those are going to go away. I'm just going to circle them and cross them out. What I'm left with is my answer. I have 5 and then another 3 positives, so that is a +8. Now I'm going to show you the tricks that will be the rules where we won't use our pictures, and that'll help us when the numbers are a little bit bigger. The rule is keep, change, opposite, not to be confused with keep, change, flip when we're doing division of fractions. This is keep, change, opposite. And this is what it is. We're going to keep the first sign the same. We're going to change subtraction to addition. And then we're going to change the sign of the second number to its opposite. So here's where opposites are coming in as well. After we do that keep, change, opposite, we're going to follow the same rules that the addition was. So let's practice this a little bit. So I'm on the front. These are our 5 examples. We're going to rewrite this with our keep, change, opposite. We're going to keep everything the same for the first number. We're going to change the subtraction to a positive. And now we're going to make this a negative number instead of a positive number. Now we are adding 2 negatives, so we follow the same rules as the addition. We have to keep the sign the same and add the digits. So that's going to be 280. Let's try the next one. We're going to keep the first number the same, change that to addition, and then this becomes a +30. Now we just have 200 plus 30, and now we have 230 as our answer. Now let's move on to number 3, and then we'll save these for you to try first. So we're going to keep this a positive number. We're going to change this to addition, and then this becomes a +10. Now all of our numbers are positive, so we have an answer of 150. Go ahead and try these last 2 first, see what you can do on your own, and then push play to see if you are correct. So following keep, change, opposite, keeping 200 a negative, changing it to addition, and then this will become 300 that is positive. Now we have to figure out absolute value. Which number will have the greatest absolute value? That's the 300. That's a positive number, so that answer is going to be positive. And then subtract 300 and 200, and I get 100. The last one is the trickiest, because you have to recognize that 70 is a positive number. So I'm just going to come up here. You're going to keep the -90 the same, change the subtraction to addition, and then this 70 will become negative. And now we're going to combine 2 negative numbers to get a negative answer and add our digit. I apologize, it's a little blurry, but basically it's talking about when you're adding two, when you're subtracting two positives, it's going to change to a positive and a negative. And this is the keep change opposite rule and what it does. So when you're having a positive and you're subtracting a negative, when you keep change opposite, it's going to turn both of them into positives. If you have a negative being subtracted by a positive, when you keep change opposite, it's going to be a negative plus a negative. And when you have two negative numbers being subtracted, when you keep change opposite, it's going to be a negative plus a positive. So again, we're going to practice this a little bit tomorrow. It's a kind of a bonus lesson for you to make sure you're understanding how to combine integers, and then we'll continue on in the next video with lesson 5.4. Look forward to see you tomorrow.